Welcome, welcome, welcome again to our third installment of the NEOS Academy. Again, my name's Eric Hill. Kyle Koger-Hobson will be with me today, helping me out. So please feel free in that Q&A session, go ahead, our questions, ask any questions that you'd like. And again, we'll get to those as quick as we can. If Kyle can't answer them, we're going to answer them toward the end of the session anyway. So let's get going. So we're going to do some administrative things because we're going to talk about value codes, value categories, and those things when we're talking about the value tab and setting those things up. So one thing we want to do is go into our settings for value codes, mini directories. We're going to scroll down, and in our mini directories, you're going to see our value categories and value codes. This is where we'll set both of those up, and they will reflect to the value tab. When we click on value codes, then we can set up what type of code it is, a full description of it, what type of value code is it? Is it a credit or a debit? Is it a DTF? Is it a due to firm item? And if that item is active or not. If I need to add one, I can always click the add button here and add that next item. If not, I can just discard. Same with value category. Now that I've got my code, I can enter the value category. What is this true item or this value item about? We can add what type of category it is. Again, it's fully customizable. So when you click the plus sign, you can add a new one and add what you want. And then we're going to mark it active or not. Not only do we want to add those value categories and value codes, but we also want to look at our permission group. The NEOS administrator or your administrator of your NEOS will want to set those permission groups up and give those people in accounting or those that are going to be doing the value tab, you're going to want to have those settings set up. So I've created an accounting role group, going down to accounting, and you see they're all blue check marks. If at any point you don't want them to be able to see those items, add, modify, or delete, you can check each one of them individually, turn them off, turn them on, or I can set off the whole row. Just remember, anytime you make an adjustment in those settings, you're going to want to click save. Also, if you get someone new that comes to accounting and you want to give them those privileges, go to those staff members and add those people there. We're also going to talk about timekeeping. So when we talk about timekeeping, there are a couple of settings that we are going to need to adjust. In your firm preferences, time and billing, make sure you enable time tracking. Then you can set what types of cases you're going to keep time on or track time that you want it to automatically pop up. And you can also set those staff members. Not only do we want to do it in the firm preferences, but we also want to do it in those case types. Right over here on the right-hand side, we're going to track time. And of course, any adjustment that you make, you're going to want to click that save button. We have some cases that already track time, so I'm not going to do it for this one. So you've got it turned on here in the case type. We've got it turned on in our firm preferences. And we also want to set it up for that user profile. When I go down to time and billing, I also want to enable Eric to track time, automatically track time, and timer auto prompt. And again, we'll talk about that once we get to a case that actually tracks time. You'll see that pop up right as soon as we get to that case. Good. Well, let's get going. First thing we're going to talk about is the value tab. going into the value tab and creating an entry or adding an entry, adding whatever it may be. When we go into the value tab itself, we're going to click the add button to the right. We're going to use that value code. That value code is what we just set up in our settings, in our mini directories. Choose that value code. How much is the amount of this entry? Was there a reduction at all? The party that this value code is written on, and then the provider. We're going to want to look for that provider. Of course, it's showing us some of those that we've chosen before, but if you click on it, it will tell you need to search. So click on that search button, find that provider, select, and then you can add that entry or that provider. Do we want to mark this as a lien on the case? If not, we can go down and start entering all of the information about or the details about this entry. The memo line, what is it for? What is it about? The value category. Again, we talked about the value code. Now the value category gets a little bit more explicit as to what is this truly. Was there an invoice associated with it? Did we cut a check to pay for it with the check number? Who's it billed to? Our service date. And again, as much of this information you can fill in is good, and you may not have all of it, and that's fine too. Once you've filled in as much information as you've got, just click the Save button. At that point, that value entry is now going to be in the system for us, and there we can see it right there. If I single click on it, I get my quick access panel, or I can double click on it and get the full detail of that value entry. From there, I can go down and add a payment. Edit any of the information that I've added or entered. If I need to update something. If there was a reduction, I can add or change any of that information. Same thing here in the views list. I can hit that drop down and group them by group. So I want to see all of my DTFs together, all of my case expenses, all my medical together, and see their totals. If it's due to firm, I can hit the drop down and see all of the due to firms that we've marked. All of my medicals. Again, I can click one time and get that quick access panel to see just quickly at a glance the information on that value entry, or I can double click and it'll bring that whole detail window open for me. And again, the list view just takes them back to individually, so they're not grouped together. Settlement view. You can see your recovery here and any DTFs that need to be paid. From there, we can also run a settlement memo. I can download a settlement memo. I'm going to run the standard settlement memo in PDF or DOCX. It's up to you which one you want. Once it's generated, it will generate, and then you can see that item here. Again, you can save that settlement memo and drop it back into Neos if that's what you wanted to do in the Case Docs tab. And it's going to show you the total amount due to the client. So if we know it's $24,659.30, I can then come in. I want to add an entry to zero it out. So it's a client disbursement for $24,659.30. $28.30. I think that's how much it was. Make it Miss Kinsey, because that's who we're writing our check to. And save.
Eric, we just we can't see the settlement memo. Maybe do that.
Not a problem. I'm sorry. Give me 1 second. Let's see if we can try that again. So the settlement memo I ran a second ago, can you guys see it now?
Yeah. Okay,
great. So it was $24,659.30 that's due Ms. Dogger. From there, I just added a client disbursement for $24,659.30. So if I download that same settlement statement again, it should be zeroed out at this point. There it goes. And we can see our $24,659.30. And that means that the client, or this case, is at zero now. Any questions at all about any of these things we've talked about, please feel free to put them in the Q&A. So one thing I'm going to do now is go to a billing case that we've got, or at least look at one of our billing contacts, because I'm going to add your master client billing rate. So when I can go down to billing rates, anytime I deal with Raphael, I know that he is one of our adjusters, one of our medical providers, whatever it may be. And we do so much business with him that he doesn't always charge us the regular rate when we work on certain cases. So he's whatever it may be. I can put in his rate that he charges per hour. And then I can also add an exception rate, which means once I add him to one of our groups, like an attorney's group, he's only going to charge us $250 an hour rather than the standard $350. And again, we can put that in per provider. So then that's their standard billing rate. So when we go to a case, come on. I'm marked as a timekeeper. So if you notice, this is a time tracking case. Our timekeeper automatically popped up and started keeping time. If I know I'm going to be working here a little bit, I don't need to work on this right now. I can close it because that time tracker is going to keep going. So I can go around and do the things that I need to do, work on case stocks, whatever it may be that I need to do and get those things done. The thing that I like the most about this is I'm at 27 seconds, 28, 30. I need to go to another case real quick. 32 seconds. I'm going to work on Kinsey Dogger's case for a little bit and do some stuff in the management and the value and the accident info and those different tabs. As soon as I go back to Raphael's case, it's going to pick back up and start that timer again for us. Once I'm done, I can just hit the red stop button. It's going to bring up a time entry window for me. I can also add it as a note. Put my time, and notice it already kept 45 seconds. I can add a task code. Is this a billable item or is it just something that I worked on real quick for them? Again, if I check billable, it's asking me that rate, who we're billing to, our bill date, increment, or I could put in my time here that we spent, and then of course our value code. If I don't want that time going, I can always go to the time tab itself and click add and create a brand new entry. My duration was 4 hours. Save. And then that time entry is now in this case for me. Good. So now that I've got my time in, I can go to the value tab in this case, and I can invoice that time or invoice those items. Not only our time and expenses, our attorney's fees, our cost, everything. If I want to invoice, I want to create a new one. I want to include fees and costs. Who are we billing it to? Then I can hit save, and it's going to create that invoice for me, showing me all of those items that are in that invoice. If I want to download and look at it, notice the one that I marked billable compared to the one that I didn't. Once that invoice has been created, I can then submit it. Once an invoice is approved, it can no longer be edited. Are you sure? Yes. And now that is an invoice that is pending for payment. And again, we can see those there, and we can approve, deny it. Once it's approved, can no longer be edited. Are you sure? So once this invoice has been approved, you can't edit it anymore. It's just showing you all the data that's there. Then once Mr. Rosenblatt pays his bill, I can mark it as paid also. And again, that's covering the value tab, adding the values or adding values, value codes, value categories, adding time entries, setting those permission groups, and making sure that our master client has their correct billing rate. Are there any other questions or anything Ms. Koger Hobson, you'd like to cover or look at? Sure. One of the questions was, can you show how to add a cost that will be due to the firm after it's settled? When you go to add an entry and say it's a case expense that the firm paid out $150, whatever it may have been, so once you've got that detail up, you can create a new transaction. And that's where you can create that due to firm and also create a check request. This demonstration will not include the NEOS integrator. And one of the questions was, can you track time without billing? Yes, you can always add a new entry. Say it was research. And I can uncheck billable and say I spent 3 hours on this research that I was doing for this case. I'm just not marking it billable. If you mark it billable, then it's going to apply that rate and everything to the value tab for that time entry. One of the questions was, please explain the value code types. The knowledge base article is very vague and has a lot of type options are also vague. For example, in our experience, trust and escrow are the same thing. Also refund to those who okay, talking about the value codes. This is where you're setting those value codes. And if there's a value code here, like you're saying, that has two things that are like the same, you can actually go in and delete one of those items if you don't want that item there. So again, you're setting that code up how you want it to see or read in the value tab, a full description of it. What type is it? What type of value code is it? And is it a debit or credit? Is it a due to firm debit? Also, is it an active item?
And Eric, if we could stay here for just another
Sure,
second,
not a
to
problem.
add
Yes,
a little
ma'am.
bit onto this. So the code is the code that you're going to select on the value tab. So it is, what is this item that we're putting in? So it could be attorney fee, case expense, client disbursement, those types of things. That type has a lot to do with what you're also going to see in the settlement view on the value tab, because that pulls from what type of item it is. So while you could have, if you look down our screen here, funeral expenses, and you could have lost wages and medical, those would all generally go into the same section. Those are going to be items that are part of your damages. Then we have, you know, for instance, maybe you have mileage, or you have copies that you want to also include separately in case expenses. Those would be case expense types. So that's where that type really becomes valuable. Is here's the code. This is what I'm identifying on the value tab, but the type is going to say, where do I really want it to pull when I pull it into that settlement screen in the value tab. Eric, are you able to go back to Kinsey's case for us?
Of course I can.
And so across the top, you'll see you've got values, invoices, funds, settlement. Settlement is using that functionality. So if it was identified as an attorney fee, it'll go into the attorney fee section, if it's a cost, and so on. So that's what those are helpful for. And there was also a question about escrow and trust. Yes, the reason that we have different options for escrow and trust is really people use different terms. So they just use a different terminology depending on area from my experience.
Correct.
Thank you. We did have another question. Absolutely. Are you able to edit the format of the settlement memo? So David, we actually offer several settlement memos. I believe it's 8 versions of the settlement memo. Those are all standard, we provide them. However, if you were looking for something to be customized for your firm, you could reach out to our report department and they would be able to give you a quote for creating a more customized settlement memo.
Thank you, Kyle.
Can you obtain a report of all the time entries added? How does it look? So reports for time entry could be done a couple different ways. Eric's going to show us one way by doing a grouped view.
And I don't know if we have time. We do. Awesome.
Yep, there we go. All right, so you can see here that you do have the timed entries, and you could do a right click, and you could export and get the time that way. That's one option. Another option would actually be using your advanced search option. You can write any report pulling your time entries in and be able to get the columns and data that you want to pull out. Advanced search is a little bit lengthier, so I would recommend, if you are interested in that, scheduling some time with your trainer.
I was going to say, definitely want to reach out to your trainer because it can definitely go down a rabbit hole.
Yes, absolutely. Let's see.
Can you upload a PDF of bill or case costs like medical record, fee, or expert retainer? You can always upload a bill or retainer agreement or anything like that to the the case docs tab. That's where all of your case documents are going to be. So if you've got that item outside of Neos, you can always drop it into the case docs tab, and it's going to appear right here. Now, when you do that, make sure you're definitely putting a good category with it and making sure that those categories are here. And again, if you don't have those, you can set those up in your mini directories also. I'm sorry, not in your mini directories. It's actually document types right here under settings.
The next question is, if you delete the value code, does the associated data delete? So that's a great question. Eric, if you could go to settings for me.
Sure, I won't.
And back into mini directories and value code.
Yes, ma'am.
So we don't actually delete anything if it's already been used. What would actually happen, would be recommended is make it inactive. So generally, if you've used it, you want to make it inactive. That way, in case you do want to report off of it later, you can. But deleting it will not remove it. And Kate has another question. Can you track time without having to start and stop a clock? How long each user spends in a particular matter? So you definitely can track time without starting the timer by clicking the add up at the top right. And they can come in and put how long they've spent on the case. That might be really valuable if they were actually at court. You're not going to have a timer in front of you, but when they come back from court, they can come in and add the time entry.
Right, and that's one of the things that I was describing earlier when we talked about travel time to a deposition, taking the deposition travel time back. You may spend 6, 7, 8 hours in that adventure. I don't want you to come in here, start the timer, and wait 6, 7, 8 hours. You can come in, make that entry, and say I was there for 6 hours or whatever it was. And make that entry. If it's billable or not. Again, that's one of the things that Patrice had asked. Can we mark an item billable or not? Yes. Then I'm going to put in my increment value code and save that item.
Wonderful. We have a question on the value tab when we showed to export or to right click
Yep.
and export. We saw the options. So one of the questions was to export as XLSX. You can definitely do that from one of these screens. So if you're in a list view, case expense, value, time, records requests, those are all examples of list tabs. Those you can come in, right click, and then you would have the option CSV, export as XLSX. I think there's one other as XLS that's just kind of hidden at the bottom there. There we go. So those
XML.
you already have those, and you already have those available.
Yep, those should be available for you right now. Can you add
And then Sasha had a question about adding the attorney fee. Can you add an attorney fee to be a percentage of the settlement instead of a set rate?
So I went into the settlement calculator here, and that's where you can add that percentage attorney fee. Is that what you were asking? I'm hoping, Sasha? Awesome. Perfect.
Great, we have some time for some additional questions if you have any questions on the case accounting or billing and invoicing. How would the report look like with the fee as a percentage? So this is attorney, this settlement memo, the attorney fee you'll see was towards the bottom.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I closed it. I'm sitting here trying to move it.
That's okay.
Sorry. And of course, I keep bringing it over here and it still opens up on my other screen.
So the attorney fee in this particular settlement memo is contained in the deduct and retain to pay others, but it's going to vary depending on the settlement memo you use. And like you said, earlier, we do have 8 versions of settlement memos. So you want to find the one that works best for what you're looking for and how you want to show it. Maybe the settlement memo with attorney fees up, the third one from the top there.
Yeah, I'm just showing them all the different ones that are available in here.
So there's just an example. If you wanted the attorney fees broken out into a separate section, these are all the attorney fees that happen to be in that case.
And again, this is a test case. So when you see some of these things here, they're not true, but this is what it would look like.
And where to change the default percentage for attorney fees. So there's not necessarily a default percentage for the attorney fees in NEOS. So when you went into the settlement calculator, depending on your case, you would enter the fee. So if it was a 25% fee on your retainer, you would enter 25%. If it was a 33 1/3, enter 33.333, 40%, and so on.
I have this webinar scheduled for a full hour. So if you have any questions that you think of, feel free to put them in the chat. Oh, we do have it in.
If a bill is
If a bill is 0, it does not come over to the settlement memo. That is correct. So if a value item has been paid, it is not considered an item that needs to be deducted from the settlement. So it does not come into the settlement memo. If that's something that you're interested in, again, we could work with customizing a settlement memo to show 0 items, but generally those items are not considered due, so they don't need to be deducted from the settlement.
I need to test this with my custom closing report to see how it affects the memo format that was created for us. Okay, Kelly. Kelly Luckett and then Kelly Hamilton. I'll make it quick. When using the SM payout. Okay, I'll make it quick. When using the SM for LIA payout, then later making entry for client disbursement you distribute, then UIM is agreed upon. How does that work?
So that's actually a great question. Really, there's a couple different ways that you can handle that. And generally, if you've settled the liability, you run a settlement memo, you've dispersed the funds, those items should be zeroed out on your value tab. And then you would leave the case open for negotiating the underinsured motorist claim. Once you've settled the underinsured motorist, any new expenses that have come up, you would put those in throughout that time of negotiation. Additionally, you would add that UIM settlement. So, you get that $15,000 from Geico, you put that in, your fee that you're taking off the UIM settlement, and then you would generate a new settlement memo that would show the breakdown of those funds.
And Laura, your question was, how would our firm decide whether funds applies to us or not? If it's a firm, if it is something that the firm has paid out, so you've paid for medical records or you've paid for this item or that item, that would be considered a DTF or a due to firm item. So when you're in that item and you're making those payments and those things, you want to make sure that it is due to firm, or that due to firm has been checked and edited, because that way you know that it is what is to be paid back to the firm. Does that make sense? I hope. Does this have to be, Kelly asked again, does this have to be manually?
Yeah, and I think, if I'm understanding the question correctly, does this have to be done manually? For zeroing out the payments is what I believe is the question. And no, there is a quicker way to be able to do that. So if you are ready to disperse the funds and you need to add the transactions for everything that's left due, you can select the items that are due. So in the checkbox to the left, we could select case expense, due to firm, any of these items that are still due. We're not going to select all of them because this case has a lot of them, but we're going to do bulk action, add transaction. And from here, this is all the items that we're paying out on the case. Because at the end of the case, we do not need to create a due to firm. If you are using an accounting integration, you could leave the create check request for all transactions toggle on. And then that way it would create the check request for you. If you're not using either of those, then you would toggle both those off. Select create, and then those items will no longer be due. So you've now marked all of that paid, and then it's just the new items that come in for your UIM settlement. You can go ahead and, yep. And Laura, I see that you had a clarification. So Laura's question is actually on the firm funds option at the top there. So funding is generally used with law pay, and that is something that is used when you are receiving funds not from the insurance company, but from a client. So if you're doing billing and invoicing, that's generally when you're going to use the funds. And Laura, if that is something that you do at your firm, we could definitely have some time set up with your trainer to go through that whole process. And can you run a report to see the hours tracked by staff member by day for all cases in which they track time, or is this time tracking only able to be seen while in the case? You can definitely run a report. We have a few that are already available, for time reports. You can come in and run them. There is one that should be by staff. Time by staff. One of those. And you can pull from value, or you can pull from the time tab if you're not actually sending to the value tab because you're not billing, but you just want to see time spent. There's two different options. So you can do it from value, or you can do it from the time tab. Or one of the things we discussed earlier is you can run a advanced search report, and you can create your own reports that you want to see. And if you want to run the tax time by staff by task detail.
This one?
Yeah, that'll work.
Okay. Then I can start just the date period.
Yeah. And then apply. And so we have the quick report here. From here, you can export. This one you would export as a PDF legacy. And you would see the data. You can also do that right click in this grid, right click, export as CSV or XLSX. Hope that report example helps.
So she's looking to get a report that allows her to pull by case that only managers can see.
Yeah, and I think that'll require a little bit more detail, something that you probably would want to work with your trainer on, because I think we can give over 400 reports in the system. You also have the ability, again, to write an advanced search report so you can get whatever criteria you want to see. So I think that would go, again, a little bit more detailed than we're able to provide in this session.
Can you run a report of time entries for a single case? Of course, if you go to that case, and again, like we were seeing in the time, and that's on a case-by-case basis.
Great. Elliot had a question on the value categories and value codes. If you could go back to settings.
And again, it's slower. I went to settings, many directories, and then scrolled all the way down to the bottom and see your value categories and value codes.
Yeah, so let's look at value codes. So Elliot said he didn't have a client disbursement. So every firm might have something that says something a little bit different. The default that does come with NEOS is normally CDB, so C for client and then DB for disbursement. The description would be the same, but your code could be different. It could be the same. I know, Elliot, you've had the program for a while, so you may have a different code that you're using or should be used. If not, you can select add up at the top right, and then you'll see that first row come in, add a code. So if you want to say client disbursement, CDB, give it a description. The type you will want to be client disbursement. And that is a debit because we are deducting it from the total value of the case. We would not create a due to firm because once we pay that out, we don't want to get reimbursed for the client disbursement. And then we would leave it as an active item.
And then save, and now it's in there for us.
Any tips for tracking reimbursable court costs so that will show on the settlement memo? If they're put in as a case expense, once you pay them, they'll go into a DTF or due to firm. It's going to show that who you paid, so it'll show that you paid the court and the amount. So outside of that, you might have some additional specifics that you want to provide. We would definitely be able to have your trainer work with you on that.
Are there any reports to pull as to what funds should be held in trust to make sure your trust account is balanced with NEOs?
So there are ways of handling that, whether you show paid by, paid to. Essentially, whatever you have on your value should be, as far as case expenses or due to firm, that should match with firm showing in general. From there, when you pay something out of trust, so if we're at the settlement point, but we're holding funds or kind of going back and forth, you should be identifying that on the settlement on the value tab. So if there's an expense that you've paid out of trust, you need to make sure that you show here that it's been paid out of trust, because if not, you will never balance. There's some other ways to handle a specifics of paid to and paid by trust. So some firms will like to go a little bit deeper. That I would say, let's go schedule some time with your trainer so that we can set that up appropriately for your firm, and then help create a report.
Awesome. Kyle, I can't thank you enough.
I do see we have one more question. There was a question about the difference between case expense and due to firm. And that one's a question that we get a lot. Case expenses are the item that we do need to pay out. So you get the court fee, or you get your FedEx bill or medical records. That's what we want to put in as the case expense, because we need to pay SIOCs or Clark County courts. So we put those in as the case expense and the providers who we're going to pay. Once we've paid the case expense, that's when it does become a due to firm. It's not a duplicate entry. It's actually showing what is owed to us at that point. So case expenses are anything we still need to pay out. Due to firm is anything that we need to get back.
That we've already paid and we need to get our money back.
Exactly.
Yep.
If there are no other questions, then Eric, you can put up the ending screen. And if any attendees happen to have any questions that just come to them up until 2 p.m., we'll be able to answer them. Otherwise, we will send you a recording of this webinar, and we thank you all for coming.
Thank you everyone for showing up, and please don't forget to register for next month's.